5 friends were finishing dinner. They were all worldly men, elderly, well-to-do, 3 were married, 2 were bachelors. They would gather like this once a month, reminiscing about their youth, and after the meal, they would talk, sometimes staying up until 2 in the morning. Having remained close friends and finding true pleasure in each other's company, they considered these evenings to be, perhaps, the best moments of their lives. Their conversations touched on everything that preoccupied and amused Parisians and, as is often the case in drawing-room discussions, came down to a recounting of the morning's newspaper headlines. The liveliest among them was Joseph de Bardon, a bachelor who enjoyed Parisian life in its fullest and most exquisite form. He was neither a profligate nor a libertine, but rather a curious and still young bon vivant. He had just turned 40. A man of the world in the broadest and most appealing sense of the term, he possessed a brilliant, though not profound, mind. His knowledge was versatile, albeit without true erudition, and he had the ability to instantly grasp an idea without delving into its essence. From everything he saw, experienced, noticed, and found, he extracted anecdotes for a comic yet philosophical novel, as well as witty observations, which had earned him a reputation in the city as a man of sparkling wit. He was the permanent storyteller at these dinners. He always had a story of his own ready. It was expected in advance, and he would begin his tale without waiting for a request. Leaning his elbows on the table, puffing on a cigar, a half-empty glass of cognac left by his plate, feeling slightly heavy in the cloud of tobacco smoke and the aroma of hot coffee, he looked perfectly at ease, as some beings do in specific places and at particular moments, like a devout woman in a chapel or a goldfish in its bowl. Between 2 puffs, he announced, "Something strange happened to me recently." Almost everyone chimed in at once. "Tell us," he continued. "With pleasure. You know that I often wander through Paris, like a collector of trinkets gazing into shop windows. Only, I'm not looking for objects, but for scenes, for people, for everything that flashes by and happens around me." So, in the middle of September, the weather was divine then, I left the house in the afternoon, not knowing where to go. At such moments, one always feels a vague desire to visit some charming lady. You begin to scroll through your mental gallery of acquaintances, comparing and weighing which of them is more interesting, who is more enchanting. In the end, you choose the one whose charm seems most appealing at that very moment. But here's the rub: if the sun is shining brightly and the air is warm, any desire to pay a visit vanishes. The sun was indeed shining, and the day was warm. I lit a cigar and simply went for a walk along the outer boulevards. I was walking without a specific destination, and suddenly it occurred to me to go to Montmartre Cemetery, to wander there for a while. I have a great fondness for cemeteries. They are calming, they bring on a melancholic mood, and sometimes I need that. Besides, good friends who can no longer be met rest there, and I visit them from time to time. Montmartre Cemetery holds one particularly poignant memory for me. My former mistress lies there, a woman who once tormented and stirred me immensely. The memory of her brings me sadness and at the same time regret of all kinds. And so I go to her grave to dream. For her, everything has already come to an end. I also love cemeteries because they are gigantic, incredibly populous cities. Just think how many dead are contained in such a modest plot of land, how many generations of Parisians have settled there forever, eternal troglodytes in their tiny caves, in little pits covered by a slab or marked with a cross, while living fools take up so much space and make so much noise. Moreover, in cemeteries, one finds monuments that are sometimes no less interesting than exhibits in museums. The tomb of Cavaignac, I must admit, reminded me, although I am not prone to such comparisons, of one of Jean Goujon's finest works, the tomb of Louis de Brézé, who rests in the subterranean chapel of Rouen Cathedral. All of what is called modern realistic art, gentlemen, originates from here. This dead Louis de Brézé is more truthful, more gruesome, more reminiscent of a real breathless body still contorted by a death spasm than all those contrived, hideously depicted corpses on modern tombs. However, at Montmartre Cemetery, you can also admire the monument over Baudelaire's grave, which is not without a certain grandeur, as well as the monuments to Théophile Gautier and Murger. On the latter's grave, I recently saw a single pathetic little wreath of yellow immortelles. Who could have brought it? Could it be the last of the grisettes, now completely decrepit, perhaps serving as a concierge somewhere nearby? It's a charming statuette by Millet, but it is falling apart from neglect and dirt. So much for singing of youth, merger. So, I entered Montmartre Cemetery, and I was suddenly overcome by a sadness, not a very painful one, but the kind that, when you're feeling pretty well, makes you think, one can't say this is a very cheerful place, but my time hasn't come yet. The feeling of autumn, of a warm dampness saturated with the scent of rotting leaves, and the weakened, weary, languid sun further intensified and poeticized the sense of loneliness and inevitable end, as if inherent to this place, which smells of decay. I walked at a slow pace along the cemetery avenues, where neighbors no longer visit each other, no longer sleep together, and no longer read newspapers. And I began to look at the epitaphs. This, believe me, is the most amusing pastime in the world. Neither Labiche nor Mailhack could ever make me laugh as much as the comedy of funeral prose. Ah, how much more successfully than all of Paul de Kock's works do these marble slabs and crosses entertain you, upon which the relatives of the deceased have poured out their sorrows, their wishes of happiness for the one who has departed to the other world, and their hopes, the jesters, for a quick reunion. But I especially love the abandoned part of this cemetery, a secluded area overgrown with large yew trees and cypresses, the old quarter of the long dead. It will soon be transformed into a new quarter, and the green trees, nourished by human corpses, will be cut down to make room in rows under marble slabs for fresh corpses. After wandering there long enough to clear my mind, I realized that I would soon get bored and that it was time to bring a tribute of faithful affection to my friend's last resting place. My heart involuntarily tightened as I approached her grave. My poor, dear thing, she was so sweet, so in love, so fair-skinned, so fresh, and now, if one were to open the grave. Leaning over the iron railing, I quietly confided my sorrow to her, which she undoubtedly did not hear, and was just about to leave when I suddenly saw a woman in deep mourning kneeling at a neighboring grave. From beneath her raised crepe veil, a pretty blonde head was visible, and her hair, parted in the middle, seemed to be illuminated by the rays of dawn in the nocturnal gloom of her headdress. I lingered. She was likely suffering from a profound grief. With her hands covering her eyes, standing motionless as a statue, she surrendered to her thoughts, completely lost in regret for the past. As if counting beads on a rosary, in the shadow of her closed eyelashes, she moved through a painful chain of memories. She seemed like a dead woman thinking of a dead man. And suddenly I guessed that she was about to cry. I guessed it from the faint movement of her back, like the trembling of willow leaves in a breeze. At first she cried softly, then louder, and her neck and shoulders began to twitch quickly. And then she opened her eyes. They were full of tears and beautiful, these distraught eyes with which she looked around, as if waking from a bad dream. She saw me looking at her, seemed to be ashamed, and covered her face with her hands again. Her sobs became convulsive, and her head slowly bent forward onto the marble. She pressed her forehead against it, and her veil spread over the white corners of the grave so dear to her heart, like a new piece of mourning attire. Then I heard a groan. She sank to the ground, her cheek pressed to the slab, and lay motionless, having lost consciousness. I rushed to her, clapping her hands, blowing on her eyelids, while at the same time reading the simple epitaph, "Here lies Louis Carroll, captain of the Marines, killed by the enemy in Tonkin. Pray for him." The death had occurred only a few months ago. Moved to tears, I redoubled my efforts. They were successful. She came to. I had an emotional look on my face, and besides, I look quite decent and I'm only 40. From her first glance, I knew, she would be grateful and well-disposed towards me. And so it was. She started to cry again. From her constricted chest came a disjointed account of the death of the officer who had fallen in Tonkin after a year of happy, love-filled married life. Having lost her parents, she had only the dowry required by military regulations. I comforted her, encouraged her, and helped her up. Then I said, "Don't stay here. Let's go." She whispered, "I am not in a state to walk. I'll help you." "Thank you. You are so kind. Did you also come here to mourn the dead?" Yes, madam. A woman? Yes, madam. Your wife? A friend. You can love a friend just as you love a wife. There is no law for passion. Yes, madam. We walked together. She leaned on me, and I almost carried her along the cemetery paths. When we went through the gates, she whispered, barely able to stand. I'm afraid I'll feel faint. Should we go somewhere? Maybe you'll have a drink? All right, sir. I noticed a restaurant, one of those where the deceased's friends go to mark the end of a tiresome obligation. We went in. I offered her a cup of hot tea, and it seemed to revive her. A pale smile appeared on her lips. She began to talk about herself. How sad, how agonizing it was to be alone, completely alone at home, to have no one, day or night, to whom she could give her love, trust, or friendship. All of this sounded sincere. All of it was touching on her lips. I was moved. She was probably about 20. I paid her a few compliments, and she accepted them with a grateful smile. Soon, as it began to get dark, I offered to see her home in a carriage. She agreed. In the cab, we sat side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and the warmth of our bodies penetrated through our clothes, one of the most arousing sensations. When the cab stopped at her house, she said, I don't think I can climb alone, I live on the 5th floor. You have been so kind, would you see me to my apartment? I gladly agreed. She climbed slowly, breathing heavily. At her door, she said, Come in for just a minute, so I can thank you. And I went in. Of course. The apartment was modest, even a bit poor, but cozy and tasteful. We sat side by side on a small sofa, and she spoke again about her loneliness. She rang for her maid to offer me something. She didn't come. I was delighted, realizing that the maid was a day worker and came only in the mornings. She took off her hat. And indeed, she was charming. Her clear eyes looked straight at me, so openly, so brightly, that I felt a terrible temptation. And I gave in to it. I put my arm around her and began to kiss her eyes, which suddenly closed. I kissed, without end. She resisted, pushing me away and repeating, Stop, stop, when will you finish? What meaning did she put into that word? In such cases, to finish can mean many things. To make her quiet, I moved from her eyes to her lips and chose the meaning I preferred. She didn't resist very strenuously, and when we looked at each other again, after this insult to the memory of the captain who died in Tonkin, her gaze was languid, moved, submissive. This dispelled my doubts. I behaved gallantly, considerately, with gratitude. After another conversation, which lasted about an hour, I asked, Where do you usually have dinner? In a small restaurant nearby. Alone? Of course. Would you like to have dinner with me? And where? At a good restaurant on the boulevard. She hesitated slightly. I insisted. She gave in, justifying herself. I am so bored. And added, I need to change into a lighter dress. She went into the bedroom. When she came out, in a simple, grey, semi-morning outfit, she was charming, slender, delicate. Apparently, she had a cemetery look and a city look. The dinner was friendly. She drank some champagne, became lively, and grew flushed. I returned with her to her apartment. This relationship, forged among the graves, lasted about 3 weeks. But you get tired of everything over time, especially women. I parted with her under the pretext of an urgent trip. At our farewell, I was very generous, for which she expressed her sincere gratitude. Moreover, she made me swear, that upon my return I would certainly visit her. Apparently, she had indeed grown a little fond of me. I set off in pursuit of new romantic adventures, and for a month, perhaps, the desire to see my cemetery sweetheart again did not overcome me enough to yield to it. However, I didn't forget her. The memory of her haunted me like a mystery, like a psychological riddle, like one of those inexplicable questions that give you no peace. I don't know why, but one day it occurred to me that I would find her at Montmartre Cemetery, and so I went there again. I wandered among the graves for a long time but met no one except the usual visitors, those who had not yet completely broken their connection with their deceased loved ones. On the marble slab of the captain who had fallen in Tonkin, There were neither flowers, nor wreaths, nor a mourner. But when I wandered into another quarter of this vast city of the dead, at the end of a narrow alley of crosses, I suddenly noticed a couple in deep mourning, a man and a woman, walking toward me. Oh, what a surprise! When they came closer, I recognized her. It was she. She saw me, blushed, and as I passed by, lightly touching her, she made a barely perceptible gesture, cast a fleeting glance that seemed to say, "Don't recognize me," yet at the same time whispered, "Come again, my love." The man was quite respectable, elegant, well-groomed, with the Legion of Honor pinned to his lapel, about 50 years old. He was supporting her in exactly the same way I once did when we left the cemetery. I walked away in deep perplexity, racking my brain over what I had just seen. To what species of creature did this hunter among the graves belong? Was she merely an inventive prostitute who preyed on sorrowful men in cemeteries, men who yearned for a woman who had passed on, a wife or a lover, and were still moved by memories of past caresses? Or was she one of a kind? Or are there many such women? Is there a special profession? Does a cemetery serve as a hunting ground just like the pavement? The professional mourners? Or did she alone come up with this brilliant, almost philosophical idea, to exploit the longing for a past love that is rekindled in these mournful places? And I suddenly had a burning desire to know whose widow she was that day.